And while this is not a new hate, this is something Jews have always lived with, we must be clear. It is a hatred that is rising once again, and Britain must defeat it once again. On behalf of the nation, I want to offer my condolences to the families and victims affected.
That was the Prime Minister reacting on Thursday night to the terrorist incident that happened at the Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester on Thursday morning. There was a car ramming, a stabbing attack, 2 people were killed, and then the assailant was shot dead by armed police. 2 people have been arrested, and the police are describing this now as a terrorist incident. We will get the very latest on this episode of Newscast on this attack, which happened on the holiest day of the year for Jewish people, Yom Kippur. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and later on I'll be joined in the studio by the new leader of the Greens, Zach Polanski, because he's on his way to the Green Party conference this weekend. But first of all, let's talk about that attack on a synagogue in Manchester on Thursday morning when a car rammed into the building and there was then a stabbing attack. 2 people died in that attack, and the suspect was then very quickly shot dead by armed police officers. On Thursday afternoon, counter-terror police officers in London, because they are in overall charge of counter-terrorism policing in the UK, described the attack as a terrorist incident. Our colleague Danny Savage is at the police cordon and has been there all day and joins us now on Newscast. Hi, Danny.
Hello, Adam. Hi.
So we're recording at about 5:20 on Thursday. Just want to paint a picture of where you are right now and what's happening around you at the moment, a few hours after this incident.
Yeah, I'm just literally around the corner from the synagogue where the attack happened at 9:30 this morning. If I just step aside for those who are watching in vision as such, down that road there is a T-junction at the end, and then if you turn left, you come to the synagogue. So we're probably about 150, 200 metres away from it. It's been closed off. The cordon where you can see people behind me is where the police cordon is, and there has been fire engines and unmarked police cars sitting there with their blue flashing lights ever since I arrived here at about midday. A massive police operation. But what struck me, Adam, when I got here was just it was eerily quiet. When the police helicopter moved away, as it did periodically, although it was here for a lot of the time, it was so quiet here. There was like a shocked silence in this community about the events here this morning. And you're in this very sort of unique sort of sense of, because it's Yom Kippur and it's such something that is observed so strictly around here, people who were caught up in this and part of this community, they're not on their mobile phones and they're certainly not talking to us, because it's such an important religious festival, even though this huge event had happened.
And we got quite a lot of detail from the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, Sir Stephen Watson, when he spoke to you and other journalists just a couple of hours ago.
Yeah, there's a lot to pull out of that. I think what is extraordinary, I think, that jumps out about today, Adam, is the really swift police reaction this morning. 9:31, the first 999 call about something going on here with a car being driven into a crowd of people and a man stabbing people. 9:37, it's declared a major incident, and the police have shot the assailant by 9:38. So effectively, within 7 minutes or so, it's all over. The other thing to pick out of that is that, before the police got here, this was down to the sort of the volunteer security at the synagogue that so many Jewish synagogues have and other Jewish community facilities have as a matter of routine. They had to deal with this as it was unfolding in front of them. So they have this car driving into a crowd of congregants in the synagogue, and then this guy obviously gets out of the car wearing what looks like an explosive device and starts, wielding a knife. Now, not only did they kind of try and deal with him, but they got the synagogue locked down almost straight away, and that clearly prevented this man with a knife and what could have been an explosive device getting into the building. And so there was another report that came in about somebody who'd rung the police saying that they were trying to see this man who was using a knife to try and get into the building. They obviously stopped him from doing that. So that was extraordinary as well. And then the viability of this explosive device too. How must people have felt when they saw him, this thing strapped to him? It may not have been viable, and it doesn't appear to have gone off or anything, but you don't know that at the time. And so what you had throughout the afternoon, once they'd shot him, they'd had to leave the body in situ, if you like, until they could get some bomb disposal experts on site to assess what he had strapped to him. And then we had some controlled explosions over lunchtime. There was about 3 of them, Adam, I think. And I think we thought, oh, it's that them dealing with the actual explosive device, but apparently it wasn't. It was them actually trying to get into the assailant's car, which he'd used as a weapon.
And there's a very dramatic piece of video that the BBC's obtained that you can see on the BBC News website and on the app of that moment where the firearms officers fire, and you can see there are people in the foreground on the other side of the fence outside the synagogue, because this is all happening in the grounds of the synagogue, and then one of the officers says, he's got a bomb, get back, and in the strongest terms is telling the bystanders to get out of the way.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary clip, isn't it? I mean, I've watched it a couple of times, and so there's one bloke just sort of stood at the fence, watching in, going, "Cool, what's happening here?" That's a busy road normally, Middleton Road, where the synagogue is, and the entrance for a vehicle to get in is quite narrow. There's a long wall against the synagogue there. But just picking up from talking to people, this is an area where lots of Orthodox Jews live, and it's an Orthodox Jew synagogue, and they particularly to have strict observance to Yom Kippur, and many of them, I've been told, wouldn't have had their mobile phones with them or anything like that. And so if there's something unfolding in front of them, they wouldn't have had their mobile phones to ring for help. So that's why the calls about it happening appear to have come from people just passing by at the time, who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time as this was unfolding in front of them. So it is extraordinary to think about how all this thing unfolded, but all credit to Greater Manchester Police. They were here very, very, very quickly. And it's interesting, isn't it, Adam, that we all woke up to the discussions this morning on all of the media outlets about the panorama last night about police bad behaviour, and there was that strange juxtaposition as I was driving over listening to 5 Live today as this was unfolding. That was the phone-in subject, yet then you had this people ringing in going, wow, well, the police have really responded to this so quickly. How brave were they? How quick were they to do this?
Then we got a statement from the counter-terrorism Policing Assistant Commissioner for the Met, because of course the Metropolitan Police in London oversee counter-terrorism for the whole of the UK. We heard from Lawrence Taylor, who did a statement outside New Scotland Yard. He said this was being treated as a terrorist incident, but the name of the person at the centre of it was not going to be released, even though the police are pretty confident they know his identity, for the safety on the ground. I don't want to get you to speculate or go into areas that you don't know about, but what do we think is going on there?
I would think that within minutes or half an hour or so of this attack happening and the police having those social media images and pictures of the attacker, they would have been trying to build a very clear picture of who that person was and the identity of him. They probably would have known pretty quickly who he was. I suspect what's going on in the background is more to do with the fact that we know who the guy is, we know where he lived, or we know where his last address was potentially. We've got a car with a registration plate, so we can probably backdate that to where it's been and where it may have been recently, where it was bought from, where its home address is, that sort of thing. And they're trying to build a very rapid picture about, is this a guy that was working alone, or is this somebody that was part of a wider network, and was there something, are more people at risk from these actions? So I think that's something to do with it. If you want to know what the attacker looks like, well, you can see from the pictures on the website, there's a reasonable image of that person up there at the moment. The motivation, well, if you talk to people from the Jewish community around here, they feel as though that this has been coming for some time, that there's been because of the situation in the Middle East at the moment in Gaza, that there's been a lot of anti-Jewish feeling. There's been a lot of hate directed at them in recent months and years, and that's been growing quite, considerably in recent months especially. And I was talking to some members of the Jewish community here at lunchtime who said they weren't surprised at all that this has happened. I think they were shocked that it's happened at their synagogue on their doorstep, but they think this has been coming for a while now. And I think from the broader point nationally in the security services is to make sure that nothing similar happens. I had a message from a friend who was at a synagogue in northwest London earlier today and word spread very quickly about this incident in Manchester, and there were messages sent to synagogues elsewhere around the country that an incident had happened at somewhere else, and people were told to stay inside and not go outside until they were confident that the situation was safe. So word got out quickly, but of course the immediate worry is this somebody acting alone, or is this part of a wider thing that there could be incidents at other synagogues or other Jewish institutions in the UK?
And I suppose another reason why the police might not go into details about someone's identity is because, as you were saying, 2 people have been arrested in connection with this, which means there's potential for prosecutions there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's it. But I think there's more. I think it's more to do with the ongoing of the moment security operation that is meaning that they're not releasing that detail at the moment.
Yeah. And in terms of how this is being processed and interpreted and felt in the wider city of Manchester, in Greater Manchester, is there a sense of how it's going down in the city?
Yeah, I mean, there was a statement released by the sort of elected members from Manchester City Council at lunchtime today saying, we've got to stand united. We mustn't be divided by the hatred that this, appears to have caused this crime. I mean, lots of people describe this as a hate crime today. The police are treating it as a terrorist incident. I mean, this is a big deal. This is an extraordinary, awful thing to happen to this community, but more broadly as well. I mean, there was a helicopter potentially used by the SAS was seen in the skies over Manchester at lunchtime. Was that used, or was personnel used for that in raids going on since then in this local area? But I don't sense a heightened tension on the streets of Manchester. People are just dismayed that this happened, Adam.
Danny, thank you very much for that update today. Thank you. Now, in other news, the Green Party conference is getting underway in Bournemouth this weekend. And on his way to it is Zach Polanski, their newly elected leader, who won the leadership contest with a massive landslide. And on his way to it, he popped into the Newscast studio so he could tell me a little bit more about the conference and how his relatively new leadership is shaping up. And Zach is here now. Hello, Zach.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming back on Newscast. I mean, you've had a busy day today, so it's the kind of the pre-conference choreography that all party leaders go through. Just run through all the things you've done already.
So I did the regional round this morning, which I believe is affectionately called the Liz Truss round, because it's existed long before her.
All the local radio stations, yeah.
Exactly, and she had that nightmare. So I did wonder how it was going to go, but actually I really enjoyed it. It's genuinely fascinating hearing all the different presenters from all the different regions around the country that have very similar questions in some ways about the big issues. And then there's always kind of a hyper-local issue that they want to know your opinion on. So I did that for radio. Then I did the same thing for TV, which I think is going out tonight. Then I went on Politics Live with Penny Mordaunt, who I have to say, I disagree with on everything politically possible. As a gay man, she's kind of iconic.
Yeah, she is quite cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Did you get on, you and Penny?
We really got on. We were on GMB a couple of weeks ago, Good Morning Britain, where we were discussing Donald Trump's visit. And in the green room, she was telling me stories about Churchill for a while, which I think she probably misjudged her audience.
Right.
But I also just enjoyed the fact that she's a human being that cares about tradition.
I mean, we're now talking about a different party, but did you get comeback vibes from her?
She said on Politics Live she's coming back. She said she's looking for an MP seat. The presenter then said, do you want to be leader? And she quickly batted that down. But I think she's probably looking at Annie Burnham and going, that's not the strategy to say that you want to be leader.
To keep your powder dry.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, in the middle of all that media, we got the news from Manchester about the events at the synagogue. What would your reaction to that be?
I mean, as a politician, sometimes you try and find new things to say. And I think there's nothing new to say here other than it's just utterly horrifying. I suppose the reflection I do have is I'm from Manchester. I'm Jewish. I went and attended a Jewish synagogue pretty near Heaton Park. I went to school very close to that area. So I think when you can associate a horrific attack with something that feels personal, it does hit a little bit harder. So I was just checking in with my mum and with my family just in terms of how they're feeling.
How are they?
Just really worried. My mum said that she has friends who go to that synagogue. She knows people who go to that synagogue. There's already a real fear in the air around rising anti-Semitism and rising hate crime. I suppose the only thing I would kind of move to, I guess, is some of the proudest work I have as a Jewish politician in my role as a London Assembly member is when I work with the Muslim community and the interfaith work. I'm recognizing that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are two sides of the same coin. And I think it's really important also as a gay man that minority communities stick together. We don't yet know the reasons for this attack, the motives for this attack. But even without knowing that, we know that anti-Semitism is on the rise in the same time that Islamophobia has been on the rise. And I think as politicians, it's really important that we look to civic decency, democracy, the work that Joe Cox did around having more in common than that divides us. And it just feels like a day for that kind of reflection.
I mean, as politicians from different parts of the political spectrum react to this, what would you say would be a bad way of reacting to it? And as you said, we don't know the details of what was behind this attack, but just in terms of handling it as a society.
I was disappointed in how Kemi Badenoch had reacted to it. She immediately pivoted to talking about the Middle East. The Middle East is something I deeply care about, and I don't want to do the same thing that Kemi Badenoch's just done whilst criticising her. I think it's really important to not conflate these issues and actually just recognise that this is about community cohesion. And of course, community cohesion is disrupted when there is conflict elsewhere in the world. But I think in the immediate aftermath of an attack, when you don't yet know what's going on, I think it's important to just focus on the victims, the survivors. And also, I think it's important to thank the emergency responders. Everyone thanks them for when they turn up, but actually there will be hours and hours now of work to do that those people are doing. And I was pleased to just hear the Prime Minister say in a statement that they're going to provide extra security and support for synagogues right across the country.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I mean, there's already a certain level of security around most synagogues. Do you think that's going to have to go to the next level now?
I think potentially. I think, again, it's about understanding what this attack, how motivated it was in terms of, was this a group? Was this a lone killer? It's impossible to know that without knowing those conversations. I think more widely, though, we can't as a society just keep making ourselves more secure or just keep employing more weapons or people or literal walls. Of course, that's a kind of short-term measure, and I'm not knocking that. It's important that people physically feel safe. I think what's much more deep-rooted are those deep conversations about who are we as a society, who are we as a community. And I think a lot of the flag discourse that's happened recently, again, not relating it to this, we don't know what's happened here, but more widely, the kind of anger that there is in society, the toxicity, finding a place to go that's about having a much more informed, nuanced conversation. It's not a deep criticism of the Lib Dems, but to see Tim Farron wrapped up in a Union Jack.
Oh, I actually missed that. Oops.
You missed something on the news. I'm amazed.
Sorry.
And I can understand why he did it. So it's not, it's not an all-out attack, but I don't think it's going to cut it. I think challenging flag waving when it's used to intimidate people, not all flag waving is about that, but there's certainly been flag waving that I would say has been used to intimidate people. As a response to that, to wrap yourself in the flag and talk about patriotism, I don't think is the answer. I think we need a much more considered, long-form conversation about migration, about asylum, about the British flag, about empire, about colonialism. These are going to be complicated conversations.
I mean, how does that happen, though? Because, since year dot, politicians have said, we need to have a big grown-up conversation about insert subject. But
yes.
These days, how do you do that?
I think it happens through leadership. So far too often, what politicians mean by leadership when they talk about connecting or communicating with constituents, in the worst case scenarios, they go to a focus group and then they make the rules dependent on what they've been told at a focus group. In a better kind of scenario, they go out to communities and they tell people what their policies are. What I'm looking to do is something very different. It's not have a blank sheet of paper. I think that's what Ed Miliband said at one point, this kind of idea of blank canvas. And then we got the Ed Stone. I think that's the wrong way to do things. I think you've got to be very clear about your values. I think there are conversations that are going to be very difficult to have. I was actually just confronted with one of these on Politics Live. There was a worker in the oil refinery where there's lots of redundancies and we were talking about net zero. It just struck me that as a politician, my very first instinct, I think it was the right instinct, was to connect with the person on a human level, that people are losing their jobs. And politicians who just bang on about net zero without connecting with that first, I think are really missing the point.
And so what did you say to them?
I said to them that everything in me feels for the people who have lost their jobs and their families. And at the same time, and at the same time is a really important caveat here, we've got to get to net zero. We've got to tackle the climate crisis. I'm not doing any good to those workers to allow more wildfires, more floods, more destruction. Again, what needs to happen, though, is a politician needs to have those direct, difficult conversations and say, more than anything, I want to protect your livelihood. I want to make sure that this is co-designed and co-produced with you and the people most affected. This doesn't happen from burying our head in the sand and just saying either we need to get to net zero, sod the workers, or the workers are the most important thing here. We don't need to worry about the science of the climate crisis. We need to have those difficult, complex conversations, but ultimately make sure we're not talking down to people, and actually politicians are in listening mode whilst maintaining values. And that's the tightrope. Maintain your values, but make sure you're listening and have those conversations.
And that's all well and good from a sort of like how the relationship between the voter and the politician and the person affected by a policy decision and the person making the policy. But what have you got to offer that person now?
To lower their bills. And that's the number one thing I want to do over the next few days in terms of the message I want people to take from the Green Party conference. Everyone knows, hopefully, that we want to tackle the climate crisis and we want to protect the environment, and that will always remain stable. What they don't know, though, is that I want to lower bills. I want to protect
all bills?
Yeah, literally all bills. So we could do things like bring the water companies back into public ownership. It is outrageous that they are pumping sewage into our water and charging us extra for the privilege. We have a government who say it would be too expensive, but we have shareholders who say these assets are worth nothing. So someone's not telling the full truth here, and my money is on the government. We can do that. We can insulate every single home in Britain that needs it. That would both keep homes warm in the winter, cool in the summer. It would bring down bills, back to that theme again. And it would create, back to the jobs theme, hundreds of thousands of new jobs in the green kind of sector that could be in trade unions, in the public sector. People are paid properly. They're treated with dignity and care at work. It just feels like there is a green vision to be had here, where far too often we've been stuck in the language of sacrifice and what needs to change that's going to be bad for people.
Eat less meat because
totally.
produce lots of carbon. Yeah. But in terms of insulating every home in Britain, very, very ambitious goal. I mean, how long would that take?
That's where you need to be in government, I think, truthfully, to go, what is the plan here? That's a deeply dissatisfying answer. I can hear that.
No, I know, that's fine. No, I understand.
But I think it can be done quicker than we think it can.
Yeah.
And where I take from that is the Marshall Plan, or also the setting up of the NHS. This was all done in response to the crisis of the Second World War. They said, we've got to change society, transform it, let's get on with it. And I think what's missing at the moment is a response to the inequality crisis. And what I mean by that is, since the pandemic began, billionaire wealth in this country has doubled, but our public assets have absolutely been stripped away. We've got people sleeping out on the streets. We've got people using warm banks and food banks. It's absolutely outrageous and shameful. It's not enough just to finger point, but it is enough to go, we can't carry on like this, guys. We can't keep the status quo. We actually need to change everything. But in changing everything, we can make sure that working class communities, small business owners, the kind of 99% of people can be kept together with what they have more in common. And what we need to recognize is there are a very small group of people, multi-millionaires and billionaires, who are controlling our assets, who are controlling the narrative. And actually, we need to challenge them. And I don't necessarily mean in an aggressive way. Some of these people, like the patriotic millionaires, a group of millionaires who are saying, actually, we think we should pay more tax. That would be better for society. I think it's about really driving this conversation and saying we really need to look at a fair taxation system, how we invest in our economy, and crucially break down this awful metaphor that a household economy is anything like a national budget.
By which you mean actually a government can borrow a lot more than, say, you or I could on our credit card or our mortgage, because the government is subject to different forces to us.
Yeah, I go even deeper than that. Who are we borrowing from? Who are we in debt to? Largely it's to ourselves and to our own banks. And so actually, of all people, Richard Tice has been talking about this, that we're paying money on commercial loans to banks that we actually don't need to be paying that money. So there's lots of places where I think we could...
Yeah, this is basically the interest that the Bank of England pays to commercial banks. Yeah.
Exactly that. And that's just one example, but I think there's quite...
Do you find yourself surprised that you're agreeing with the reform policy?
I mean, horrendously. Okay. I feel like I need to, wash myself afterwards. But I think, the point here is, I despise most of reform's politics. What I think they do really, really well, and is something I've been learning from, is connecting with people's fears and connecting with the things they care about every single day. Now, I think reform solutions are the politics of hate, despair, division, and I'm definitely not going to dabble in those at all. But if they can rocket through the polls by really cutting through, by talking about the things that matter to people in the economy, I see no reason why the Greens can't rocket through the polls with a politics of hope, community, and actual tangible difference to people's lives.
We started off this conversation talking about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and having better conversations about that stuff. Why is it then okay to say that there's a political party that you despise? Because that D word is a strong word.
Well, I think I said I I despise their politics. So I was very careful about how I said it. I think it's about not despising human beings.
But you still did use the word despise.
Because I think...
So that ups the ante, that turns up the temperature on the conversation.
Yeah, I might reflect this a little bit back on you, although I guess you're interviewing me, which is, I guess, in the media, if you say things that are quite bland or don't feel like they're kind of punchy or hitting, they're just not really heard. And that's partly, it's definitely not your fault personally. It's 24/7 media where politicians are constantly going, how can this message be heard? So I am really careful about my language. The other day I went to Labour conference and everything in me said the language here, I realise I'm using it now, but hopefully to deconstruct it, is that I'm parking my tanks on the lawn of the Labour conference. And I just think that's inappropriate with the amount of conflict we have right now. But then there isn't an obvious metaphor that we have in our society for what does it look like. Even the whole language.
Yeah, so why did you go to the Labour conference then?
Because I wanted to speak to people who wanted the Tories out, absolutely don't want the politics of reform, and feel like their only choice is Keir Starmer. But this is a Prime Minister who has cut disability benefits, kept the two-child benefit cap at
Well, no, he reversed his plan to cut disability benefits.
Right, okay. I mean, still... still not good enough that was even on the table, that for lots of people in this country, they were deeply worried about that. And I would say is still enabling the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And so I know there's lots of people in the Labour Party who are deeply unsatisfied, deeply disillusioned. I also know that Keir Starmer, or whoever the future Labour leader's campaign will be, is it's me or it's Nigel Farage. And I want to deconstruct that narrative right now because it doesn't have to be that way. We're no longer in a two-party system. The Green Party at the last election got nearly 2 million votes. We've got 39 second-place finishes. We've got 80,000 members now. The reason why that's significant is that's a 33% increase in the entire membership since I announced I was running for leader. We've also had 21 defections this year alone, 10 of them last month. So there's a very clear trajectory for the Green Party right now. That's not just about disaffected Labour voters. It's also about disaffected Tory voters, even Reform voters and people who haven't voted yet. But I think there's a very clear narrative between now and May when we have huge elections where we're hoping to win the mayor of Hackney. We're hoping to win seats right across Manchester in the north of England. A lot of these votes will come from previous Labour voters. So I just wanted to go to exactly where they were, speak to people on the street. I vox popped. I love a good vox pop. And actually, learnt it from you guys. But what I saw time and time again is actually people who were legitimately angry and frustrated and saying that Keir Starmer got through on one word, which was change. But what change has he really offered? And even where there has been change, has it really been changed for the better? And so I think this is a moment for an alternative. I'm not surprised that more people than ever before are going to join.greenparty.org.uk. Sorry, that was cheeky.
No, you've got to get the plugs in. You talked about defections. That's at a local level. Can you imagine a world where a Labour MP defects to the Greens?
I can't imagine a world where it doesn't happen, actually. I think it's probably coming closer and closer. I really legitimately...
Are you talking to people?
I'm talking to people all the time, and I legitimately don't have an answer right now. Otherwise, I think I'd be tempted to kind of hint at it. There's no Labour MP right now that's saying to me, I'm going to defect. There are lots of Labour MPs who I'm regularly talking to who are so deeply unhappy and can't see a route anymore in the Labour Party. Someone who said this kind of thing publicly, so I will be indiscreet and talk about them, is Clive Lewis. He says that right now he feels like he needs to stay within the Labour Party and fight within the Labour Party. He is not shy about his criticism of the Prime Minister. He's not shy about his criticism of the entire programme of the Labour government. So Clive's a friend. He's someone I have a lot of respect for. But I also think there's a point where it doesn't make coherent sense anymore to be so unhappy with a party and so unhappy with the government, but to say I'm still going to stick here. Because actually what I see is the Prime Minister uses those people as a shield. He talks to the left of the country and he goes, oh, look, it's not all that bad. I've got Clive Lewis and Nadia Whittome and I've got Richard Burgon. It's all going to be fine because these people are here. And I do think all of those MPs who I have time for, at some point, when is enough? And it's not for me to decide that. That's up for them to decide it. All I'd say, my door's very open.
I was going to say you extended an open hand, but you went for the door.
Yeah, I've got a boring caveat, which is it's not my decision. It's an elected bodies within the Green Party because we're very democratic.
Yes.
But I appreciate that's not a fun conversation. So
if it's going to happen anywhere, it would be here.
Right. Yeah, true. So that would be the thing that needs to happen. But also, I'm a leader who won the election with 85% of the vote. I think what I say does matter.
Yeah.
And I really want to see those MPs defect.
Well, that's what I was then thinking about when you talked about the internal structures within the party that basically binds your hands, is a sort of negative way of putting it. You would say it's a flourishing of direct democracy within the Green Party of England and Wales. I mean, do you think there's a case for toughening up the powers you as the leader have because you won such a convincing victory, and actually maybe less compromise behind the scenes, more your way.
I'd almost say the opposite, and I'm not arguing here for less powers. The leader of the Green Party has very little kind of formal power. It's all about, do you have a microphone? What are the things you're saying? But actually, I think those things really matter for the exact reason where we partly started this conversation, that I'm not a blank sheet of paper. I have lots of ideas and lots of opinions. But also it means that I don't ever just go off on the things that, I think that day. There's a genuine community feel of me going around the country constantly. I'm constantly traveling to local parties all around England and Wales. I'm listening deeply. I'm out on doorsteps and constantly evolving the message, constantly both fitting in with my values, but also listening to what's being reflected back at me. I think that's a much better way of doing politics. And I don't just mean for the Green Party. I see that as a role model of how I would want us to do politics as we increasingly control administrations or run administrations and increasingly have more MPs in government. It's about making sure we have that connection. And then the other bit I would say with that, which is where we're not where I want to be yet, is with the trade unions. I want to form much deeper links with ultimately not the trade union leaders, but actually the workers, because they're the people I really care about. And I think ultimately if the leaders of trade unions don't represent their workers, then the workers will make different decisions. And I want to make it clear that I'm there to keep having those conversations, both with the workers and with the leaders, because I think the home of the worker is in the Green Party.
But just as we get ready to scrutinise the Green Party conference this weekend in Bournemouth, I mean, should we not be looking out for like your classic trademark policy being launched on the platform, because that's just not how the Green Party works?
That's right. And I actually am not launching a policy. And some of the media rounds this morning, I think, found that quite odd, because traditionally you do launch a new big policy. And I thought about it and we kind of brainstormed some ideas. And then I just thought, I want to go back to basics. What is the Green Party for? The Green Party is the party of environmental, social, racial, and economic justice. Everyone knows about the environmental bit. So I want a conference speech and a conference where if journalists just take one message from it, the Green Party care about the cost of living crisis. We care about the fact that we've got to tackle the climate crisis. But to do that, we need to make sure that working class communities are not badly affected. In fact, quite the opposite. In tackling the climate crisis, we need to make sure that we are bettering people's lives, that we're redistributing power and wealth around this country. And I think all of that's quite a complex message. I think it's communicable and I hope I'm doing it. But I think you don't need to add new shiny things or new policies to that. I think it's going back to basics and saying there is a 1% who control the power and wealth. Let's redistribute that. And that's ultimately what you get when you join the Green Party. I also, secondly, I'm careful about promoting podcasts on other podcasts, but I really am going somewhere substantial. I launched a podcast the day I became leader of the Green Party, Bold Politics with Zach Polanski. It went to number 3 in the country. I'm not competing with Newscast. I wouldn't ever do that. But the important reason why I'm saying this is I've used it as a platform to platform, I would say, lefty voices that you would expect. I had Gary Stevenson on yesterday, although he'd say he's not a lefty voice. Owen Jones on Saturday night. I'm doing a live episode with Grace Blakely. I've got Jolyon Rubinstein coming on, so Zoe Gardner, amazing voices. But actually where I'm really interested in is on day one of my leadership, I went to Clacton because I thought rather than go somewhere where I'm just kind of listening to people who already agree with me, I want to go have some more challenging conversations. And I met a guy there called Paul who'd just come out of prison. He said he was really bothered by migration. He then said, I'm Irish, so it's not that I hate migrants, but just look at my community. His words, not mine, but it's a crap hole. You know, how can you say that we need more people here? And I just said to him, would you have this conversation with me on the podcast? Because I think it's really important as a party, people can hear that we're listening to voices that you wouldn't necessarily expect us to agree with. And we are not just listening, but we're actually evolving as a party to make sure we're reflecting people's concerns. And that's people right across England and Wales. And so that's really what I want to do with this conference. It's not about policy as much. It's about going, actually, what does this look like in the round? I should caveat all of that with I am proposing a new policy, but I'm going to do a conference for.
Okay.
But it's just to challenge Labour's indefinite leave to remain changes. And I just think it's important as a political party in British politics that people know is unashamedly saying migration is part of what makes this country great. And as much as...
And so would you leave indefinite leave to remain as it is? Because Shabana Mahmood wants to increase the qualifying period and put more factors in there, like your contribution to British society, to decide whether you get the status or not.
I think it's grim and I think it's outrageous. And I think we need to be clear where it's coming from. Donald Trump says something one day, the next day Reform repeats the same thing, And then a few months later, Keir Starmer starts to panic and starts to legislate for that. We are on a doom spiral with all of this. And actually what we need is politicians to look the public in the eye and say, even though this is difficult for you to hear sometimes, migration is really important for this country. This country was partly built on migration. And actually, when you look at the NHS, we've got 150,000 vacancies. Now, I know someone will say to me, what about British workers? Of course, we need to train British workers. And of course, that's part of the picture. But also what's truthful right now is that if you use the National Health Service, the person who treats you or cares for you is so much more likely to be a migrant than anyone in front of you in the queue. And we never hear these arguments, or very rarely.
Yeah, but not to get pernickety. So you're going to oppose the Labour changes, but would you keep indefinite leave to remain as it is?
For now, but I do think there's a longer conversation about how do we make people feel more welcome in this country. And I recognise someone who is less judicious than you would immediately say to me, but look at the polling, look what people care about. And then I go, the small boats, that's 5% of migration in this country, but I would say it dominates about 95% of the conversation about migration. So for media, keep up the conversation about small boats, and then polling says people are worried about the small boats. It's all one vicious cycle of not hearing from voices that are going, actually, I hear your concerns. And if your concerns are about not enough council homes, can't get a dentist appointment, feeling like the country doesn't really work anymore, I share those concerns and I think they're totally legitimate. But those concerns are decades of Conservative austerity and now Labour austerity that are not going to fix those things. They're not the problems of migrants. And I think comes back to the blank sheet of paper thing. When I think the public are not in the place that I think they need to be on these issues, we need to put the information in there. And I think that's part of the politician's job. I also think, as well as that, it's not about sneering at people or talking down to them, but it is about saying if people have got the right information, that's part one of part two. The second part, though, is sometimes people can have all the information in the world. If there are powerful vested interests that are pumping out dangerous and toxic narratives, then you've got to take on those vested interests. I think the Green Party in the past have done the information bit. They've not done the vested interest bit. I'd like to think of myself as fearless, and I'm ready to take on those vested interests.
Okay, well, from one podcaster to another, thank you very much.
Thanks, really enjoyed it.